In the dim glow of a opulent ballroom in 1950s Harlem, where the air shimmered with jazz notes and the clink of crystal glasses, a young black woman named Elara stood frozen at the threshold. Her heart pounded like a drum in a forbidden rhythm as the gatekeepers, elite figures from the community's upper echelons, held up a simple brown paper bag against her rich mahogany skin. Whispers rippled through the crowd like venomous snakes. Too dark, too ugly, unworthy of love or marriage in their polished world. Eyes bore into her, stripping away her dignity, reducing her to a shade on a spectrum of acceptance. She had dared to dream of crossing into this realm of possibility, where matches were made and futures sealed. But the bag test, that cruel relic of internalized racism, barred her path once more. As tears welled in her eyes, a shadow detached from the throng. A tall, enigmatic millionaire whose presence commanded silence. With deliberate grace, he approached the barrier, his fingers closing around the edges of the infamous bag. In one swift motion, he ripped it away, unveiling a truth that shattered the room's fragile facade. Elara's knees buckled, her body crumpling to the floor in a heap of overwhelming shock as the world around her spun into chaos. What hidden secret had this act exposed, and how would it unravel the threads of prejudice woven so tightly into their lives? The suspense hung thick, drawing the audience deeper into Elara's world, where beauty was not a gift but a weapon wielded by the privileged. Her collapse was no mere feint. It was the culmination of years of silent suffering, now bursting forth in a single, transformative instant. As the millionaire stood tall amid the gasps, the story promised to peel back layers of injustice, revealing how one woman's pain could ignite a spark against the darkness of discrimination. Elara's journey began in the sweltering streets of a segregated southern town, where the sun beat down on cotton fields like an unrelenting overseer. Born in the early 1930s to a family of sharecroppers, her skin carried the deep ebony hue of her ancestors, a heritage rich with resilience but burdened by the scars of slavery's legacy. From childhood, she witnessed the invisible lines that divided even her own community. Lighter-skinned relatives afforded small privileges, like better seats in church or nods of approval from white passers-by. Her mother, with a complexion closer to caramel, often warned her in hushed tones about the world's harsh judgments, urging her to stay in the shadows to avoid the sting of rejection. As Elara grew into a graceful young woman, her dreams soared beyond the confines of her reality. She possessed an inner light, a sharp intellect honed by stolen hours with borrowed books, and a quiet strength that turned heads despite the barriers. Moving to the north during the Great Migration, she sought refuge in Harlem's vibrant yet stratified scene, where black culture flourished but colorism festered like an open wound. Here, social clubs and marriage prospects hinged on archaic tests, remnants of a time when proximity to whiteness equated to worth. Elara found work as a seamstress, her nimble fingers crafting gowns for the very women who would later scorn her. Each stitch was a silent prayer for acceptance, for a love that saw beyond the surface. Yet curiosity built like a gathering storm. Whispers of exclusive gatherings reached her, events where eligible bachelors and debutantes mingled under chandeliers, their entries vetted by the infamous paper bag. If one's skin was darker than the bag, they were deemed unfit, too ugly, by the twisted standards of internalized oppression. Elara's heart ached with a mix of defiance and longing. She yearned to challenge this, to step into the light and claim her place. Little did she know, her path would intersect with a figure whose own rise from rags to riches hid secrets tied to the very injustices she endured. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test the limits of her endurance, drawing her inexorably toward that fateful ballroom door. The injustices piled upon Elara like layers of unyielding earth, each one pressing harder on her spirit. In her early 20s, she ventured into the workforce beyond sewing, applying for positions in upscale department stores that catered to Harlem's elite. Time and again, she faced the subtle dismissals. Managers glancing at her skin tone before averting their eyes, muttering excuses about fit or presentation. One particularly stinging rejection came from a boutique owner who, without shame, compared her complexion to the shadows in the alley behind the shop, implying it would deter customers. Elara swallowed the bitterness, channeling it into quiet acts of rebellion, attending secret meetings of emerging civil rights groups, where voices like hers began to murmur against both external racism and the self-inflicted wounds of colorism. Socially, the wounds deepened. Friends with fairer skin invited her to gatherings only to leave her on the periphery, where she watched lighter women twirl into dances and courtships. One evening, at a modest house party, a young man she admired confessed his interest but withdrew when his family intervened, citing the bag rule passed down through generations. "It's not you," he had implied through his silence, but the message was clear. Her darkness made her unmarriable in their eyes, a relic of beauty standards poisoned by centuries of white supremacy. Elara experimented with creams and powders peddled in back alleys, their harsh chemicals burning her skin in futile attempts to fade what society deemed a flaw. The emotional toll mounted. Nights blurred into tear-soaked vigils, her mirror reflecting not just a face but a battlefield of self-doubt. As years passed, Elara's resolve hardened. She immersed herself in community work, volunteering at churches that preached unity yet practiced division. Rumors swirled of a legendary millionaire, Marcus Thorne, a self-made tycoon who had risen from poverty through savvy investments in black-owned businesses. Whispers hinted at his disdain for colorism, born from his own mixed experiences, rumored to have a family secret buried in the past. Elara crossed paths with him indirectly, sewing a suit for one of his events, her work praised for its precision. Emboldened, she gathered courage to attend the annual Grand Ball, a pinnacle of Harlem society where marriages were brokered and statuses affirmed. The event's gatekeepers enforced the paper bag test with ritualistic fervor, a brown sack dangling like a noose from the doorframe. On that fateful night, tension coiled in Elara's chest as she approached, dressed in a gown of her own creation, its deep crimson fabric mirroring her unyielding spirit. The crowd parted, eyes narrowing in judgment. The head matron held the bag to Elara's arm, declaring her too dark, too ugly for entry into their sanctified unions. Murmurs turned to outright jeers, the word unmarriable echoing like a curse. Humiliation washed over her in waves, her dreams crumbling under the weight of collective prejudice. Yet, as she turned to flee, Marcus Thorne emerged from the shadows, his presence a thunderclap silencing the room. His eyes locked on hers with a recognition that sent chills through the assembly, building toward an explosion of truth that would expose the rot at the heart of their world. The ballroom fell into a hushed void as Marcus Thorne strode forward, his tailored suit exuding the authority of a man who had conquered empires. Elara stood trembling, her body a vessel of pent-up agony, as he reached the doorway where the paper bag swayed mockingly. With a gaze that pierced through the facade of the elites, he grasped the bag, not gently, but with a fierce rip that tore it from its perch, shredding it into fragments that fluttered to the floor like defeated confetti. The act was symbolic yet visceral, a direct assault on the test that had fractured so many lives. In that instant, Marcus revealed the hidden truth. He was Elara's long-lost father, separated from her mother by the very colorism that now sought to destroy his daughter. Years ago, as a young man with darker skin, he had been shunned, forcing him to build his fortune in secrecy while hiding his family to protect them from scorn. But success had armed him with power, and now he unveiled documents from his pocket, birth records proving Elara's lineage, entitling her not just to entry, but to inheritance and respect. The room erupted in gasps. The matrons who had mocked her paled, their hypocrisy laid bare. Elara, overwhelmed by the flood of revelation, her worth affirmed, her pain validated, felt her world tilt. Her legs gave way, and she collapsed in a graceful fall, the emotional torrent too immense for her frame to contain. In the wake of Elara's collapse, the ballroom transformed from a den of division into a crucible of change. Attendants rushed to her side, but it was Marcus who cradled her, his paternal embrace a balm for decades of absence. As she regained consciousness amid the murmurs, the truth rippled outward. Marcus announced the dissolution of the bag test at all future events, pledging his fortune to initiatives combating colorism, scholarships for dark-skinned youth, campaigns exposing internalized racism, and alliances with civil rights leaders like those emerging in the movement. Elara, once deemed ugly and unlovable, rose not just physically but symbolically, her story becoming a beacon that illuminated the shadows of prejudice. Her life blossomed in ways she had scarcely imagined. With her father's support, she launched a fashion line celebrating all shades of black beauty, her designs gracing runways that defied old standards. Marriages in the community shifted, with couples forming across the color spectrum, inspired by her resilience. Elara found love not in spite but because of her authenticity, partnering with a kindred spirit who saw her depth. Yet the impact extended far beyond personal triumph. Her tale fueled broader conversations, echoing in speeches and articles that challenged societal norms, contributing to the swelling tide of the civil rights movement. As the years unfolded, Elara reflected on that night as a turning point, a reminder that beauty's true measure lies not in skin, but in the courage to dismantle chains. What if one act of defiance could rewrite the narratives of millions? In a world still grappling with racism's echoes, her story urges us to rip away our own bags of bias, fostering unity where division once reigned.